Imagine boarding a plane for what should be a routine flight, only to vanish into thin air and then reappear decades later as if time itself had been suspended. What you're about to hear defies every law of physics we know, challenges our understanding of reality, and remains one of aviation's most disturbing, unsolved mysteries. This is the story of Flight 513, an aircraft that disappeared without a trace, and landed 35 years later with a cargo so terrifying, investigators still refuse to discuss it publicly. September 12, 1954. Santiago Airlines Flight 513 departed from Aachen, Germany, carrying 92 passengers and crew members bound for Porto Alegre, Brazil. It was supposed to be an 18-hour journey, a long but ordinary transatlantic flight. The weather was clear, the aircraft was in perfect condition, and the experienced crew had logged thousands of flight hours between them. Everything was routine until the plane reached the Atlantic Ocean. Then, in an instant, it simply vanished from radar. No distress call, no mayday signal, no wreckage, nothing. It was as if the aircraft had been erased from existence. Search and rescue teams scoured the Atlantic for weeks. Ships, planes, and submarines combed through thousands of square miles of ocean. Maritime authorities checked every island, every coastline, every possible crash site. But they found absolutely nothing. No debris, no life vests, no oil slicks. Not even a single piece of evidence that Flight 513 had ever existed. Families were devastated. Investigators were baffled. The airline declared all passengers deceased. And slowly, painfully, the world moved on. The mysterious disappearance was filed away as another tragic loss to the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. But here's where the story takes an impossibly dark turn. 35 years later, on October 12, 1989, air traffic controllers at Porto Alegre Airport in Brazil detected an unidentified aircraft approaching their airspace. The plane wasn't responding to radio calls. Its transponder was broadcasting an outdated signal format that hadn't been used in decades. When controllers finally established visual contact, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was a Santiago Airlines aircraft, a model that had been retired from service years ago, circling the airport as if preparing to land. The tower immediately dispatched emergency crews. As the plane descended, witnesses on the ground reported that it appeared to be moving in slow motion, almost gliding rather than flying. The landing gear deployed, and the aircraft touched down on the runway with unusual smoothness. It rolled to a complete stop near the terminal. Then, silence. The propellers stopped spinning. No doors opened. No passengers emerged. Ground crews approached cautiously, their radios crackling with confusion and growing dread. What happened next has been suppressed, disputed, and debated for decades. When the crew forced open the emergency exits and entered the cabin, they discovered a scene that would haunt them forever. Every single person on board, all 92 passengers and crew members, were still in their seats, perfectly preserved, as if they had simply fallen asleep mid-flight 35 years ago. But they weren't sleeping. They were skeletal remains, mummified by the unique atmospheric conditions inside the sealed aircraft. The captain was still gripping the controls in the cockpit. Flight attendants were frozen in the aisles. Passengers had newspapers from 1954 spread across their laps. The aircraft's fuel tanks were completely dry, which should have been impossible. The plane couldn't have flown across the Atlantic and circled the airport without fuel. The instruments in the cockpit were all functional, but showed readings that made no sense. The clocks had stopped at the exact moment the plane disappeared from radar 35 years earlier. The flight logbook's final entry was dated September 12, 1954, describing normal flight conditions over the Atlantic Ocean. Brazilian authorities immediately sealed off the aircraft and launched an investigation. But within hours, the plane, the remains, and all physical evidence were reportedly confiscated by officials whose identities were never disclosed. Witnesses were told to sign non-disclosure agreements. Photographs were confiscated. The official story became that the sighting was a hoax, a misidentification, a case of mass hysteria. But too many people saw the plane. Too many ground crew members entered that aircraft. Too many air traffic controllers tracked it on radar. So what really happened to Flight 513? Theories range from the scientific to the supernatural. Some researchers suggest the plane entered a time slip, a theoretical tear in the fabric of space-time that allowed it to skip forward 35 years in an instant. Others point to electromagnetic anomalies in the Atlantic, areas where compasses spin wildly and instruments malfunction without explanation. Conspiracy theorists believe the aircraft was caught in a military experiment gone wrong, possibly involving early tests of technology we still don't understand today. But perhaps the most chilling detail isn't what happened to the plane. It's what happened to time itself inside that aircraft. If the passengers and crew died the moment the plane disappeared in 1954, why did the plane land itself 35 years later? If they survived in some suspended state, why were they skeletal remains? And if this was all an elaborate hoax, why would authorities go to such extreme lengths to erase every trace of evidence? The questions multiply, but the answers remain locked away in classified files and fading memories of witnesses who are too terrified to speak. Flight 513 remains officially listed as lost at sea in 1954. There is no memorial for the landing in 1989. No investigation was ever made public. The families of those 92 souls were never told their loved one's final resting place became a ghost ship drifting through time itself. And somewhere in the depths of government archives, the truth about what really happened waits in the darkness. A secret too impossible to reveal, too terrifying to acknowledge, and too mysterious to ever forget.